I'll be giving you, yes, everyone consents to recording. I do as well. Awesome. So today I'll be giving you kind of an introduction to what UX research is, what are personas and journey maps, because like I feel like in a hackathon, you don't even generally have enough time to actually go out there and conduct research with real users. So I would just be giving you an introduction to what research is, how it's done, why it's done, and then we will jump into what is a persona and a journey map and how you can kind of create that to support your design activities at the hackathon. But before I do that, I kind of want to give a quick introduction myself. I am Simran. I am a user experience researcher. I currently work at Macadamian Technologies. Macadamian is a healthcare consulting firm. So we work with different clients in the healthcare space who come to us with their products or services that they're trying to improve. And our work generally starts with doing some sort of alignment with them, alignment with the stakeholders, and kind of then jump into doing research with the users that informs the design process. I've been doing research for close to 3 years now, and I also have a background in engineering and management, so I kind of bring that perspective to my UX research approaches. I also want to give an introduction to IterateUX. So IterateUX is a community of UXers from all experiences, all experience levels and backgrounds, where you can kind of learn, connect with others, grow your career in a fun and supportive environment. They do weekly events. They do coffee chats as well, design feedback, portfolio and resume reviews, design challenges, and whiteboard challenges. I am a mentor at the community. So if like you are kind of curious about UX research or you want to learn more about UX research or have a chat in general with me, you could do that through the community. All right, in terms of what I'm covering today, I'd be giving you kind of an introduction to what is UX research, why we do UX research, what does like the process of conducting UX research look like, what is a user persona, what are journey maps, an introduction to how kind of you can use some of the information that I'm sharing with you throughout your hackathon. And in the appendix, I've added a few resources that you can dig into to kind of read more about research. And if you, there's like a lot of information there. So if that's a space you want to explore, you can get started through the resources that I've shared in the appendix. Oh, sorry. So what is UX research? As per the Interaction Design Foundation, user experience research is the systematic study of target users and their requirements to add realistic contexts and insights to the design process. As UX researchers, we adopt various methods to uncover problems and design opportunities. Let's dig deeper into this specific definition. So what do we mean when we say it's a study of target users and their requirements? We as user experience professionals are human-centered. So what you are trying to do as a researcher is to kind of understand humans. And what you're doing is you're focusing on two things. First, who they are, that is their characteristics. So this would mean what are their goals, what are their wants, what are their needs, their desires, their motivations, their mental models, which is how they think about how things work in the world, basically their attitudes. And the second thing that you're focusing on is their environment. That's what does the world around them look like? What's the context that they're operating in? Who is around them? And how do they behave and act in this context? So these are the real insights as a researcher that you're adding to the design process. And when you gather this data and generate your insights, you kind of highlight what are the problems that the users are facing, the pain points that they might have. So research is basically used to define your problem, identify the problems, as well as what are the opportunities that there might be to make things better. So the focus of research is defining the problem, identifying different opportunities. But why do we care about users' problems and opportunities? Uh, because in any business context, the organization is trying to develop an intervention in the lives of the users. It could be a new intervention or an improvement of an existing one. And these interventions could be the products that the users are using, both physical and digital, as well as the services. Again, they could be both physical and digital. And because these interventions have to fulfill a purpose, basically a user need, and have to work in the world that the user operates in, the UX research focuses on understanding the user's characteristics and their environments. But what's the purpose of generating this in-depth understanding of users? It's the business decisions. Any business or organization has certain business goals and objectives, and they are trying to work towards those goals. And these are generally tied to, these business goals are generally tied to them selling kind of a product or a service to their target users. And as these products and services are being developed or improved, there are certain business decisions that need to be made on what the latest version of this product, service, feature should look like for the user. And that decision-making process is not that straightforward. It's kind of the organizations relies on two primary things. One is information. This information could be gathered through basically the data and insights, and it could be gathered through users' interaction with the actual product or service. So data science, a lot of times you use Google Analytics to see how the user is interacting with your product or service. And the other way to gather this data and insights is through user research. And the other thing that the kind of the businesses focus on for decisions is the industry. So when I say industry, what I mean is the experience of the professionals that work in the industry. So their gut feelings, and this gut feeling is developed by years of experience working in a specific domain. So they hire people who are experts in those areas. And the external factor is the trends. So any kind of disruption that's happening in the industry, which is leading to kind of a collective behavior change in the users. But it's important to make sure that these trends kind of fit within the users and companies' goals. So want to make sure that these behavior change that is happening is based on kind of what the company is trying to do and what the users is trying to do. So some of the user research would also kind of try and understand the relationship between a trend and how it fits with the business context. Today, what you would be trying to do is do some research maybe to inform some of the design decisions that you would be making through the activities that you do during the hackathon. So before we jump into what you can do during the hackathon for your research, I want to walk you through what does conducting research like end-to-end process look like. And the reason I want to walk you through this is because when folks are new to design, which I would assume a lot of you guys are, is that we see research as a subset of design. Like research supports design, but that's not always the case. A researcher's role is kind of at the same level as a designer. So researcher could be working with business stakeholders to kind of define what the long-term strategy is going to look like and define those long-term goals and like direction for the company. And at the same time, a researcher would also be working really closely with the designers, collaborating with them to kind of help figure out what the next iteration of the product is going to look like. Is the product or the solution direction the right direction? Are we actually solving users' problems or not? So it's like, it's at two levels. So there's a close collaboration between a researcher and designer, but the research is also helping the business with what direction they should be working towards and focusing on. And it's a time-consuming process. There's kind of science involved behind it. So let me walk you through that, what that process looks like. So that process starts with understanding the decisions. So kind of get an understanding of what business decisions that need to be made. And this business decision could be a broader decision, a long-term decision, or sometimes a very short-term decision. And for example, in your case, it could be, okay, how should we know this problem exists. How should we solve for it? What should we build an app? Should we build a website? Should we kind of build an actual physical service? So those could be some of the business decisions that a company could have. Um, and you also need to kind of identify what are these, out of all the decisions that business is trying to make, what are these decisions that the researchers could facilitate? Because research cannot answer all the business questions or cannot help with all the business questions. So that's the next activity you would want to do, is like figure out what decisions research can facilitate. So once you've done that, once you have a good understanding of the decisions that you're trying to inform, you then go ahead and identify the research opportunities. So where can research help? How can research help? What decisions are the highest priority? So you identify your research, where research is helping. Sometimes what as researchers we do is we create a research roadmap. So we understand the business context and we're like, okay, based on this, research can help in these areas, and this is how we are going to provide a like plan for it. This is how we're going to solve, try and help facilitate those decisions. We are going to prioritize in this order. So that's the kind of activity you would do. Not necessarily you. A research lead is someone who's generally doing that. Once that is kind of identified, you know what kind of research needs to be done on your team. And that's where you go ahead and start planning your research. So at this stage, what you're doing is writing a research plan. And a research plan is nothing but just like kind of a document that illustrates what are the business goals, what are the research goals based on those business goals, what is research going to try and uncover? So what are the research questions? How is research going to go and gather that data? So what methods is research going to take? And then how much time is the research going to take? Who are the users you're going to be doing with the research with? What does the timeline for research look like? And what are some of the final deliverables that you would create based on the research? So that's something that you kind of decide and think about in the planning phase. And once you've planned your research, you go out there to the users that you want to collect your data from, and you do just that. You go out and execute the research method that you have picked and collect that data. And based on the method that you have, the data could look like either interview recordings, because you decided to go out there and do user interviews, interview notes. Again, you have a note taker who took notes. Survey responses, if it's a survey that you're done. It could be screen recording if you're asking users to perform different tasks, and so on. So depending on the method you have picked, you will have a certain set of data that could be a certain format. And it could be a qualitative data or quantitative data or a mix of both. So depending on the type of data, you would then figure out how you would go about analyzing and synthesizing that data. So what we as researchers do is like we kind of code our data. So we'll create different tags based on our research questions and code the data, go through the data multiple times. And what we are trying to do is kind of recognize what patterns exists, find answers to questions that we were asking initially. And through that process of analysis and synthesis, we then generate insights and build artifacts. The goal at this stage, again, is to like kind of make sense of the data and generate insights. And you have to kind of go back to the research questions to guide your research, to guide your coding and like basically guiding your analysis and synthesis approach. So once you have, sorry, before I jump into the next step, I kind of want to share what some of the artifacts could look like from research. So I said that you create some personas or journey maps through this hackathon. So all the research that you've done could help you create something like a persona, which is basically defining what a target user could look like, or a journey, which is defining what kind of experience the user goes through at different kind of stages as they kind of try to achieve their goal. We'll dig deeper into these two kind of artifacts, but this is something that is an outcome of your research. And there's multiple ways you can create an outcome of your research. Sometimes it could also just be a detailed report of your research. But lastly, once you have kind of created that research artifacts in your report, you will be sharing your findings with stakeholders. So depending on who your audience is, your artifacts would look very different. So if you are kind of sharing your findings with a CEO, you might want to share high-level picture with recommendations on what their decisions are and what decisions should be made. With a designer, for a designer, you might want to kind of dive deeper into the findings to help them inform their design decisions as well as their approach. So the next thing I would want to do is jump into user personas. But before I do that, I want to pause here and see if anyone has any questions in terms of like what user research is. I know we've gone through everything at a very high level. So just want to spend some time to see if anyone has any questions, and I'd be happy to answer those. And feel free to send your questions either in the chat or just speak up. Okay, so one question I'm seeing here says that any tips on how to conduct some forms of user research under the time constraints of a hackathon? So this is a good one. And I think something I want to highlight on is like time constraints. Whenever you're doing research, you'll always have some sort of constraint. And you have to take that constraint in account. And based on the constraints that you have, you will pick a specific method that you would use to do research. So at a hackathon, my assumption is that you all have kind of a prompt that you're given to solve for. That's your problem statement, and maybe you're working towards scoping down that prompt into like a problem statement. So some of the things that research can help with is one of the methods that we use as researchers is called lit reviews. So we go in online to find any published articles, published papers that are out there regarding the problem area that we're focusing on. And the reason we do that is we want to kind of understand that problem space in a bit more detail so that we can scope on what problem we are solving for. Sometimes the prompt, I don't know what your prompts look like, but sometimes the prompts that I have worked with in my school is like they're very broad prompts, and you really need to scope it down sometimes to figure out who the target user is that you're going to be solving for. If you're solving, say, for example, for a sustainability development goal, that goal itself is very broad. What part of that goal are you going to be focusing on? And sometimes those decisions obviously could be made based on assumptions, but at the end of the day, you want to pick a chunk that is most impactful. So where the 80% or where the most amount of problem lies in. And later on, I've shared an approach. I've linked an article in this slide deck that kind of shows an approach that I followed to define the problem statement. I read a few articles, read a few kind of journal papers to understand a specific problem space, and I was like, okay. It was around food loss and waste. I was like, what's the difference between food loss versus food waste? Do I want to focus on loss versus waste? Where does maximum, I don't remember what was the one that I picked, but where does the maximum food waste occur? Okay, it occurs at this stage. So that allowed me to kind of really understand and narrow down on where the most of the problem exists and where by solving that problem can we have the most impact on the overall problem. So that's one thing that you can do. And the other thing you can do is find out some proxy users. So you might be solving something or creating something that could be the same population as yourself. So you're creating a solution that could possibly work for you. So you could use some of your experiences to create maybe a user persona, a journey, user journey, or you could go online and again, like look at certain characteristics of the target population that you kind of are focusing on. So once you've defined that target population, you're trying to understand their characteristics and their behaviors, and you can pull from your personal experiences, and you can pull from what you're finding online. Um, when you're presenting your findings, though, make sure that you do specify that the kind of artifacts or the research that you've relied on is provisional artifacts, provisional research, because you haven't gone out and done research with actual end users. So at a hackathon, you can do those things, but I would say that you don't have time to actually go talk to the users. Is there any other question anyone has before I move ahead? All right. So in terms of the two artifacts that I'm sharing with you today, user personas and user journeys, the reason I want to walk you through this is because, again, these would be provisional artifacts that you might create, but it will really help you streamline on how your design approach would look like, and make sure that there's an alignment between your team. Make sure you always have in focus who you are solving for. That's through the user persona, and kind of what journey or experience they're going to go through this solution, or what kind of journey you would want them to go through the solution that you are designing. So let's look at the user persona first. So what is a user persona? A user persona is basically an archetype of an actual target user, which basically represents a cluster of users who share similar goals, behaviors, motivations, etc. And as I said, like, these personas are based on real world data, actual research that you do when you go out there. But you can create provisional personas, and that's an activity that you can do at the beginning of like, once you've defined your problem, that's an activity you can do to build a professional persona, to kind of put in context who you are designing for. And the persona kind of describes the target user's goals, so what their needs, what their wants, and their behaviors as well in context of their life. Why do we build personas? Some of the things that I was mentioning before is that this persona helps you build empathy for the users. Sorry, I was just looking at the question. I got distracted. Yes, that I'll share the deck in the workshop channel after I'm done presenting. Sorry. So why do we create user personas? The first thing is that we are not our users. So we need to kind of have some sort of empathy and understanding of what their experiences look like at the moment. And having a persona, creating this character, allows us to put ourselves in the user's shoes and then design from that mindset or point of view. And what this does is this ensures that you're solving for the user and not yourself, because generally what we tend to do is we solve for ourselves, not the users. So the persona is basically externalizing users' needs. And then it leads to team alignment on design decisions. So when you're not aligned, or you're like, there's conflict between you and your team members on whether we should do this or that, you can go back to your person as like, okay, this is what their needs are, this is what their problems are, this is what their pain points are, and that's what we're trying to solve. So based on that, we should be doing this and not this. So a persona could be a good tool to help with team alignment. And lastly, it also helps you identify opportunities. So based on the needs and the pain points that you have put together, you can think of different ways you can solve for those needs and solve for those pain points, which kickstarts that ideation process. In terms of what that persona could look like, again, this is a provisional example. This just helps you put on paper what this person's needs are, what this person's goals are, so you can kind of have a quote. Generally, we put a quote on personas because we want to make sure that we have a statement that tells who this person is. Like it's just something that's coming out of their mouth. And these quotes are generally picked from the research we have done. But in your case, you can create a quote, or you can also skip it depending on where you are in your stage. But this is just a template that I'm sharing with you, where you would put together the name, the title, a little bit of their background, their skills and experience, if that's something that's relevant to what you're solving for, what their goals are, what their different characteristics are, their needs and pain points. So again, as I said, like I know we might talk about these things. I know we might have a shared understanding about these things, but putting it on paper really makes it concrete, and you can then go back to it when you are doing a design process. So that's about building personas. Is there any questions before I jump to journey mapping? Okay, I don't see any questions popping up. So I'll move on, and feel free to jump in if you have any questions regarding personas and journey mapping towards the end. So the other artifact that could be really useful for you during this hackathon is a journey map. And what is a journey map? A journey map is basically an artifact that's used to communicate the story of the target user. So basically their journey as they're going through the experience of using a product or a service. So I'm the user. I want to achieve this goal. This product or services that are there is going to help me achieve that goal. But what does that experience of achieving that goal look like? That's what a journey does. So a journey map kind of shows what the users are doing. So different activities that they're performing and different events that are happening um, across kind of a time and place, I should say, and across a time and place. So basically, what are the different phases of their journey as they move along a specific experience? And they are doing like they're doing as they're going through that experience, they're interacting with different people and or different things. So what are the touch points? And you also want to capture how they're thinking and feeling throughout this journey. So the journey basically puts in context what the user is doing, what their goals are, who they're interacting with. So you kind of have a clear understanding of what their experience looks like as they're as they're going through the process of achieving that goal. And having that understanding can help you identify what you can do to improve that experience, improve that journey of achieving that goal. And that's what it is meant by current state versus ideal state journey map. So a current state journey map is based on research. You do your research, you understand and like define as the user is going through using your product or service, what does that end-to-end experience look like? Whereas in an ideal state journey map, and that's something that you can do with the business stakeholders or with your designers to kind of define, okay, now we understand the current state journey. We understand what the problems are, what the pain points are. We have defined what the persona is. What do we want the future state or the ideal state for the users to achieve their goals look like? What does that journey kind of look like? And by doing that, it again is a process of kickstarting your ideation process to see what are the opportunities at different phases of the journey that you can make better, improve, so that the overall experience is improved. Sometimes a design intervention does not have to be a completely new innovative idea. It's iterative and you're trying to improve the overall experience by looking at these individual phases in the journey and figuring out how can we make, okay, this phase better, this phase better, this phase better, and eventually you make the overall journey better. So that's the difference between a current state and ideal state journey map. In terms of what it looks like, it looks somewhat like this. So you basically go to any tool, Figma or Miro. You define what the journey phases are. So you identify what the phases are, what the users are doing, what are the touch points for people as well as things, what are they thinking, what are they feeling. And then once you've done this activity, you can then also think of different opportunities to improve the experience at each phase. So let's talk a bit more in detail about like what these different things cover. So as you're creating a journey map, you're basically first thing that you're doing is chunking it out. So you're thinking of your persona's journey across time and place, and you're breaking your journey into different phases. So once you've done that, you then next identify the different activities and events during each phase. And then also identify activities and events that kind of signal the end of one phase and end of beginning of the other. So you're looking at, okay, this specific task or the specific activity is when the specific phase ends, and this is when the next one starts. The next thing you're identifying is as the user or the persona is doing those activities, who are the different people that the user is interacting with. You're also identifying what are the different things that the user is interacting with, so different devices, different objects. It could be a mobile phone, it could be a desktop, a printer, or like a customer help desk person. So kind of like putting together what these people and things are they're interacting with will help you see how does the intervention, the design that you're creating fits in this ecosystem of different people and things that this user operates in. So once you've done that, the next step is basically like thinking and feeling. And some of this could come from your persona too, as you're thinking, as you're creating a persona, as you've thought about the different pain points that the user is going through. You want to contextualize it a bit more, like at each stage, each phase, what could the user be thinking? What's their frame of mind? And what are their expectations, as well as what are the emotions that they're going through, and what are the highs, what are the lows. So again, this is an activity that allows you to build that empathy, but it also allows you to figure out what are the areas where the users are having negative feelings or negative thoughts, and how can we make that better. So it again allows you to think through eventually what the opportunities are going to look like. So you extract these insights out from the journey that you have created, and then you make recommendations to enhance the experience. So yeah, that's kind of journey. I think we're doing really good for time. I wasn't expecting this to go this fast, but in terms of how you can use this information to throughout your hackathon is basically the first thing you can do is scope your problem statement based on some secondary research. And because we're going good on time, I'm gonna open up this example and walk you through this. So you might have gotten some sort of a challenge, some sort of a prompt, and this is something that like when I was kind of applying for a job position, I was given this prompt of like, okay, this is what the overall prompt is. And as I read through it, I'm like, I need to kind of really dissect what they are saying, what this prompt looks like. And you might not have this big a prompt, but I really read between the lines and see what the prompt says, and kind of like see how I have dissected. I have questions like lost or wasted in many works of life, effect of food waste are catastrophic. I was like, okay, what do you mean by food loss versus what do you mean by food waste? In many walks, it happens in many walks of life. What are the different walks of life that it happens in? The effects of food waste are catastrophic, and like, what are the effects of the food waste? And the efforts being done to combat food waste. What are the efforts that are being done right now to combat that? And so by asking those questions, I kind of understand what is it that I'm actually trying to do. And the next thing is like, the prompt is I need to help people be more conscious of food waste. Like help people, which people am I going to be doing it for? Who am I going to be doing it for? So kind of like see all these questions that I've kind of dissected there. And I've added a link to this. You can read through this in a bit more detail. But basically, I went out there and did some research. So I kind of read some papers for loss and waste. What do we mean? Kind of made some quick notes. And then like through the process of reading everything, I eventually was able to come with a more specific problem statement. So based on the indicators, if I go down, look at like this is my final problem statement. Like I've gone from people to households in Canada, reduce avoidable raw or packaged food waste, because they were talking about loss versus waste, and be more conscious about it. So that's how your research can help you really scope down your problem. And once you have scoped that down, then you will go out and identify who you're solving for. So you can go ahead and build a persona if you want. Then once you've kind of done that, if you feel like that you can go through an activity of understanding the current user journey, depending on the secondary research that you're doing, the things that you're reading, if you feel like you can map out what that current user journey looks like, you can also go ahead and do that. Something that I've not added here, but that's something you can do. That information will allow you to start thinking about how you can solve this problem, because now you have moved from your assumptions of what the problem is to understanding actually what the problem is, and also moved from solving that problem for yourself to solving the problem for the users that you've defined that you're going to be solving the problem for. And once you've done that, then you can maybe create a provisional journey map of the ideal state journey. So what the solutions look like. So say based on some of the ideas that you have, say you want to create an app or something like that. So now put that app context and figure out what that journey is going to look like for the actual user. What kind of experience do you want to have? What are the different phases you want to have? And once you have that journey, you can use that journey to then build a solution, design a solution, because that then breaks it down to different phases that you're going to be working on. And that allows you to also break down the work that you're going to be doing amongst your different team members. I have created a Miro board. There's a link to the Miro board here with the password. So there are templates in here. Miro is a free tool. What you can do, because building these templates can be time consuming. So we can literally go to this board, copy this, or create something like this, either in Figma or again, Miro, whichever you feel comfortable with, so that you don't have to spend time building a template rather than just filling it up through your hackathon, during a hackathon. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Again, as I said, I have some appendix sources here. There are certain books that you can read. Like this book is a general book to like understand the entire UX design and research process. Then these resources focus on just research. Nielsen Norman Group and Interaction Design Foundation, I would say, are two really big resources that you can dig into. Again, even as a designer or a researcher or both, because they have a lot of different resources on different things you can do from a design and a research perspective. And then there are a few resources that I've added here that are just, again, research focused. So I'm going to look at the chat now. Okay. In the hackathon, should we use current or ideal journey maps? So that's a good question. And depending on your time, I think that's something that you would have to really balance out. But I would say how I think about it is that if you are trying to improve an existing solution, or when you're doing research, one of the initial research that you would do is also figure out if there's anyone else who's trying to solve this problem and how are they solving it. And maybe you'll find a general trend on how the problem is being solved at the moment, or what is being done to solve that problem. So that's the kind of current state journey you can map. And if you have the time, map that journey. If you don't, like, jot that down. Make sure you do some research in that aspect to understand what is being done to solve for the problem at the moment. And then you can start thinking about the ideal state journey to figure out how you can solve, like, what are you and your team going to do to solve for this problem, given that there's an existing solution. This is how the companies are doing it, and they're still, like, it's a broken process. There's still challenges there. How can you mitigate those challenges to get a better solution? So that's where you can think of an ideal state journey. I would say focus more on the ideal state journey, because again, that will allow you to plan out your design process and plan out what activities you're going to do to solve for the user's problems. And as you're gonna, someone's asked me about the link. So basically that's all I have to share. Go back to the first deck. Okay. Am I there yet? Okay. So here's the link. Feel free to copy it. I'm gonna stop sharing. I wanna make sure that the link is actually accessible by you all. If you cannot access that link, let me know. I'll change the preferences right now. Oh, okay, it won't be accessible. It's on my private email. So I'm gonna change the access here. So anyone with this link can comment, copy link. Done. Can you all try this link now? Hopefully this should work. Oh, I see a lot of people jumping in on this deck, so I would assume that this link is working. Awesome. So you still have 15 more minutes with me. Feel free to ask any questions that you have in the chat, or just ask it basically. But that's all I have to share with you. Hopefully this was helpful. Good luck with your hackathon. And yeah, if there's any questions that you come across as you are doing your research, any sort of research, you have mentor hours, you can go to your mentors to talk about that. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. So in the slide, I've added my LinkedIn link. So if you want to ever talk about research with me, or just to kind of understand as you're going through your UX journey, you kind of want to do more research or eventually move to doing more research, you can talk to me about that. I've made my transition from engineering to management and then eventually UX. And in UX too, like, I started my journey as wanting to become a designer first, and then discovered my passion for research. So I can share my perspective and how my journey was like, so that you don't have to go through the same challenges maybe that I went through. So I'd be happy to have a chat with you all if you want that. But this is all that I had to share. Thank you so much.